From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. This Monday, May 17th, is tax day. It's a month later this year. The IRS extended the deadline to give people more time to file because of the difficulties caused by the pandemic. But that deadline is just about here. In this episode of Straight Talk, we ask, where does your tax money go? Here's what some people in Portland told us about taxes.
Gosh, I really don't know. These are, sorry, I'm not prepared.
It's not something you think about all day long every day?
It is not something I think about all day long.
If we have a pandemic and we have better emergencies to do, why are we putting money in military right now?
It's funneled away somewhere and never quite back to the people.
We'll take a look at what most of your tax money is paying for, and we have some polling from DHM Research that shows what people think about some of these taxes. Welcome to my guest, former Portland City Commissioner Steve Novick. He's also the former Communications Director for Citizens for Oregon's Future. They used to hold tax day events to educate people. Also joining us, economist Dr. Eric Fruits from the Cascade Policy Institute, a nonpartisan public policy think tank. Its mission is to advance the value of individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. And we also welcome John Horvick, the political director at DHM Research. DHM is independent and nonpartisan. Over the years, they've done a lot of public opinion polling on taxes. Welcome, everyone, to Straight Talk. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Well, before we dig into this, let's find out what you three think and if you've done your taxes yet. Steve, how do you feel about taxes, and are you finished with yours?
I just signed them today, procrastinated until today, and I generally feel pretty good about where my taxes go, both the state and the federal level. I would like to spend less money in the military, like one of the people in the street you talked to, but I'm in the minority in that, even among Democrats.
And Eric, are you done with your taxes yet?
I always file an extension. It's the most painful process, and I try to put it off as far as possible.
Hey, I'm with you and Steve. I haven't quite finished mine yet either. But John, you told me you're an early bird on taxes.
Yeah, I do mine pretty much the day I get my W-2. Mine are pretty straightforward, but I like to think of myself as if you're a Simpsons fan, the Ned Flanders of doing taxes. I'm usually probably the first guy to get them in.
I need to be more like that. Well, thanks, guys. Let's look at where your tax money goes. First, we'll tackle federal taxes. Here's a graphic from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities with a breakdown. You can see the bulk goes to Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, and then defense and the military. Steve, what do you want people to know about their federal taxes?
Well, Laurel, I want people to know what you just said, that the vast majority of federal taxes go to programs that are supported by Democrats and Republicans alike. As you just showed, that more than half of the federal budget goes to Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, and the military. And the vast majority of Democrats and Republicans are okay with that. Other smaller amounts go to things like education and transportation. And again, the vast majority of Democrats and Republicans are okay with that. So it's interesting that in an era when people talk about how politically divided we are, Democrats and Republicans are actually united in thinking that the places where most of our tax dollars go are pretty good places. The only problem is that people don't have very much good information about where taxes go because nobody makes a big effort to tell them. So we don't know how united we are. One side note, there's one piece of federal spending that a lot of people think is big that's actually small, and that's foreign aid. About 1% of your federal taxes go to foreign aid.
Some of the people we talked to on the street thought 25 to 30%. So yes, less than 1%. Eric, Steve thinks if people understood that the bulk of tax dollars go to these more popular programs that generally have some bipartisan support, people would feel better about the country and more united. What do you think?
Well, I think one of the challenges is if you look at the graphic that you just put up, all those top line numbers, I think people would say, yeah, that's where I want my money to go. Where you see the problem in the debates is when you start digging down deeper into how that money is actually spent and what sorts of programs underlying those are being funded. And that's where you find things like the waste, where you find people, you might find misplaced priorities. That's where you find things like the crazy experiments like sprinkling badgers with deer urine. that's where I think.
What
people
percentage
have
of the
problem.
federal budget goes to that, Eric?
Could you hear that, Eric?
It's a tiny percentage.
What percentage of the
You
federal
can start
budget goes
talking
to
about other
sprinkling
things.
back into Dear Europe?
Well, let me finish. I mean, you could talk about other things that are, really big multi-billion-dollar programs. You've got $175 billion last year just spent on improper payments. In other words, that's a program that people might agree as being a popular program, but that money is going to the wrong person or in the wrong amount and for the wrong reason. So that's a phenomenal amount of waste. And when people start seeing those kind of eye-popping numbers, $175 billion, then they start saying, wait, why am I paying taxes to support this kind of impropriety?
And John, you have some research that shows a lot of Oregonians think that the federal tax system is unfair. Let's take a look at those numbers. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. We hear about 77%, about 3 out of 4 Oregonians think that the federal tax system is unfair. Part of that is going to do with spending for sure, and what voters might think is a misallocation of their tax dollars going to programs that aren't productive or affect their lives. But a lot of it has to do with who they think is paying their quote unquote fair share. And what we just see consistently, and really have been seeing it for the decades we've been doing our work, is a sense that certain groups of people aren't paying up, and that's high income earners and large corporations. So setting aside whether that's true, I mean, it's a policy debate that others can engage in. It's really clear what Oregonians tell us is they feel like they're paying a lot, but others aren't.
And we'll look at that a little bit more in a moment. Let's talk about state taxes. We have a graphic that shows how our state tax dollars are divvied up in Oregon and where the money goes. This shows the 2019 to 21 budget. Mostly goes to education and human services, which includes foster care, long-term care for seniors and people with disabilities. A big chunk goes to public safety. Steve, what do you want Oregonians to know about their state tax dollars? And you could also react to what Eric said earlier if you want.
Well, again, state taxes are actually even simpler than federal taxes. Almost 90% of your income tax dollars in the state go to education, healthcare, and human services is mostly healthcare. It's mostly, as you said, long-term care for seniors and people with disabilities, and straight up regular healthcare under the Oregon Health Authority. And then a big chunk goes to public safety. I personally tend to think of child welfare and child protective services as being a part of public safety. So that is where your Oregon income taxes go: education, healthcare, and public safety. And again, I think a vast majority of people think that those are important services.
And John, at DHM, you've tracked Oregonians' attitudes on taxes and spending for years. How do they feel about state taxes? We have another graphic to help illustrate this.
Well, this is where the story gets a little muddled. So if we ask Oregonians in a general sense, in the abstract, do you think that taxes are too high and we should reduce spending? Are they about right and keep spending levels where they are, or ought we tax less and spend less? And if you frame it that way, only about 1 out of 4 Oregonians think that taxes ought to go up and public spending should increase. The vast majority, really believe that either we're spending or taxing too much and spending too much, or we're doing it about the right amount. Now, this is abstracted, and when we talk to people about government, sort of quote unquote government, they do resist. They do feel like disconnected from it, distrustful of it. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit more in what Steve is alluding to. When we get into the specific programs, specific individuals or groups that should be taxed more, attitudes can move pretty quickly. But in a general sense, Oregonians have told us, and really have told us for a long time, that they're not interested in higher taxes and more government spending.
And here's that graphic that you mentioned earlier about which groups do they think are not paying enough taxes.
Yeah, it's really clear. When we ask Oregonians these sort of questions about once a year, these are actually from 2019, although I have no reason to think they would change. Do these various groups, large corporations, small businesses, pay too much of their fair share or too little in taxes? And you can see, nearly 8 out of 10 Oregonians think that large corporations aren't paying enough, and upper income individuals about 7 out of 10. I will note there's sort of an interesting finding that's consistent with national data, is that more Oregonians, about 1 out of 4, say that lower income people are not paying their fair share than they say that middle income people aren't paying their fair share. It's something that I think for folks to really wrestle with why a fair number of Oregonians think that.
Well, let's let Eric weigh in here on what you've heard so far, and also how much waste that you think there is in state taxes.
Well, thank you. Again, going back to the federal thing with the spending, if you look at the state, Steve's right, it's about 90% is on education, human services, and public safety. And human services is growing. It's becoming a huge burden on the state budget. And part of it is due to the state's expansion of Medicaid. And it's not just under the Affordable Care Act. The state has been expanding Medicaid coverage to people where the feds are not actually offsetting the cost. So we have to pay all of it. And when you look at the population that's in Medicaid, it's less than a quarter of the population in the state is on Medicaid. So you have 75% of the population paying taxes to provide health insurance for the other 25%. And so I think for a lot of people, there comes this belief that there's a fundamental unfairness. And then you can also look at other programs that are truly wasteful. I mean, everyone remembers the Cover Oregon debacle, $300 million that was just poured down the rat hole. Before that, you had the Oregon Wireless Interoperability Network, $600 million wasted on a system that doesn't work. You could look at Portland, you've got a water billing system that didn't work for $40 million. The online permitting system, they've blown through a $12 million budget and it's 6 years behind schedule. And so when people see these things and they see it every day in the news, all this waste, all these failures to meet deadlines, they say, wait, I don't mind paying taxes if I get a bang for the buck. And we're paying a lot of bucks, but we're not getting much bang anymore.
Well, let's let John show us the poll that DHM did on what Oregonians think is wasted.
Yeah. When we asked this question, this one is from a few years ago, but for quite a long time, we've been asking Oregonians, just, hey, out of every dollar that the state spends, how many cents of that dollar do you think is wasted and how many cents do you think benefits your life? And 44% or 44 cents of the dollar Oregonians think is wasted, just 31 cents say that benefits them. Now here, and maybe to build on Eric's point a little bit, is we have plenty of polling to say that Oregonians support the Oregon Health Plan and Medicaid expansion, but I'll also note that I think it's true that these numbers, that a real sense that money is wasted. At the same time, in the last couple of years, Oregonians twice have voted to increase taxes to fund the expansion of Medicaid. So there is this sort of, I think, general sense that money is wasted, general sense of skepticism, but on the specifics, Oregonians have said many times over that taxes are okay to fund the specific services that they want to see.
And Steve, I know that you're probably dying to comment on some of that on the waste and what Eric said.
And, well, it's not surprising that people think there's a lot of waste in the state budget because people hear in the news, people like Eric all the time talking about individual examples of waste, and neither the media nor politicians do a very good job of putting that in context and explaining that the vast majority of your state tax dollars go to meat and potatoes things like teacher salaries. I mean, sure, there's waste in everything. Heck, each of us wastes money if we happen to buy milk at Whole Foods instead of Fred Meyer. And in any big organization, there's some waste. I personally have fought waste in the Oregon lottery. I thought that they were paying way too much to tavern owners simply to let video poker machines sit in their floors. But if you look at the day-to-day operations of state government, it's payments to nursing homes, it's payments to teacher salaries. And Eric was saying that 25% of us are on Medicaid and the other 75% pay. But again, a big chunk of Medicaid spending is long-term care, like nursing home care for seniors and people with disabilities. And a lot of us are going to wind up eventually in nursing homes or other long-term care for seniors, and we're not going to be able to afford to pay for it ourselves. So even if we're not part of that group now, when we get older, we're likely to be part of it.
Steve, Eric, John, it's time for us to take a break. Thank you so much. We'll talk about the dozens of taxes Oregonians passed since last May during the pandemic and look at a new income tax in Multnomah County. We're back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. Monday is tax day, and we're talking taxes with my guest, former Portland City Commissioner Steve Novick, economist Dr. Eric Fruits, and DHM pollster John Horvick. Once again, so nice to have you all here. I want to start with John here. When we're talking taxes and the pandemic, you were surprised by the robust support Oregonians showed for local taxes during the recession and COVID. Tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. In the early days of the pandemic, headed into the May primary, a lot of local governments decided to take things off the ballot or kick them to November because they were really worried that with people losing jobs and the economy turning south, that voters would say no to tax measures. But that's not at all what happened in 2020. Typically, Oregonians pass about 60% of their local funding measures on the ballot. So that's your cities, school districts, bonds and levies, things like that. In 2020, Oregonians passed 75% of the measures that were on the ballot. So I love to do polling. I love to ask people in surveys what they think, but the best measure of what they really want is what they do. And in 2020, they had the chance to say yes or no to tax measures in their local communities, and they overwhelmingly said yes. I think that tells us a lot about how they really think about taxes. I'll note that they're specific and they're local, and that really matters too.
Well, one of those taxes voters approved in November 2020 is an income tax increase to pay for universal preschool, and that tax is going to be due next April 15th if your employer isn't withholding it now. Here's a look at how much it is for single filers. All Oregon taxable income over $125,000 is taxed at 1.5%. All income above $250,000 is taxed at a 3% rate. In 2026, the rate increases by 0.8%. Now, for joint filers, all Oregon taxable income over $200,000 is taxed at 1.5%. All income above $400,000 is taxed at 3%, and that goes up by 0.8% in 2026. Eric, what are your thoughts about this tax? This isn't the first time Multnomah County has had an income tax.
Well, it isn't. They had what was known as the I-tax back in 2003 to 2005. And during that period of time, Multnomah County population actually declined. I don't think people were packing up their moving vans, but instead what they were doing is you had those high income earners who may have had second homes who were actually just changing their address on their tax forms and avoiding that tax. I remember at the time, a lot of people in Multnomah County were really surprised at how much that tax really bit. A big part of it because there was no withholding. This new tax is, it has a higher income threshold. But if you look at particularly at the single level where it's $125,000, that sounds like a lot, but I know a lot of people my age who are going to be hit with that. For example, I know a woman who's a widow with three kids, 2 of them in college. She's going to get hit with that tax, and she's already got a lot of money flowing out the door.
Steve, what are your thoughts on the new income tax for universal preschool and some of the things that John talked about, the reasons that people passed all these taxes?
I'm kind of not surprised that more taxes passed during the pandemic, because I think the pandemic probably reinforced the sense that we're all in this together and we rely on each other. And one of the ways we do that is through taxes. On the Multnomah County tax, I just want to point out that the tax only applies to income above $125,000. So, for example, if you make $130,000 in taxable income, that's after deductions and exemptions, then you only pay $75. So if Eric's friend makes $130,000, she's paying $75 because of that tax. Meanwhile, she's getting thousands of dollars in President Biden's child tax credit.
And John, you think they're really...
Another thing I want to mention is that Steve. One problem with federal taxes is that the Social Security tax, which is the biggest tax for most of us. What?
Steve, you might want to check your math.
Well, 5% at 1.5% of 5,000 is 75, I believe.
What number do you have?
Last
Eric?
I checked.
Oh, I misheard his numbers, but it didn't sound right based on what he was saying.
If you make 130,000, you pay $75. But by the way, what I wanted to say is one aspect of federal taxes that most people don't know about is that you don't pay the Social Security tax on income above $137,000. So if you make $1 million a year, then you don't pay Social Security tax on most of your income. So the fact that Multnomah County has a tax that only people who make over $125,000 pay slightly offsets that unfairness at the federal level.
Well, let me bring John in here because you think there hasn't really been enough discussion about the income tax and what it means for local taxes. Are there any constraints on how high those taxes can go?
No, no. In contrast to our property tax system, which has all sorts of constitutional limits on their rates and how fast they can go up and how long they can last, income taxes, they're not constrained in that way constitutionally. So, a lot of my work over the last, decade or more has been working with local governments, asking their voters about possible property tax increases. And now I'm hearing from my clients saying, well, wait a minute, maybe this income tax thing is a better option for our community. We know that voters believe that high income earners don't pay their fair share. We saw what happened in Multnomah County. It passed overwhelmingly. There's all sorts of constraints with property taxes. I really do think that policy advocates, policy makers, and just everyday folks need to really think hard about what happened in Multnomah County and ask themselves, is that the sort of policy we want to see in other communities across the state as well? I really do expect that this conversation to pick up steam in the years to come.
I know you get a lot of questions about the possibility of there ever being a sales tax in Oregon. Voters have consistently said no to a sales tax. What does your latest research show, John? Is there any appetite now for a sales tax?
No, hasn't been, isn't now. I don't expect it to change in the future. In the last few years, I would say there's a little bit of appetite, I think, from some sort of policymakers, policy wonks. But the Student Success Act passed by the state legislature, which is a gross receipts tax and acts a lot like a sales tax, I think whatever sort of interest there was really dissipated there. But Oregonians have consistently said no to sales tax. Everything I've seen says they'll continue to say no to a sales tax.
But Eric, you think in some ways, and John sort of touched on it, that there is already a sales tax.
Sure, we are. The corporate activities tax is a sales tax. We also have a sales tax on recreational marijuana. So for people who think that Oregon doesn't have a sales tax, you're sadly mistaken. It's here, and there's a very good chance that it could rise again. The other problem too with the Multnomah County income tax and Metro's income taxes is voters had to approve the tax, but they don't have to approve any increases. You only need just a few votes on each of those councils to raise the rate. So, I'm predicting that in the next few years we'll see that rate go up to 3%, 4%, 5%. Because there is just going to be an endless appetite for more spending, new shiny programs that will then become vital services, and we will probably end up having one of the highest tax burdens in the country.
Steve, quick response to that?
I just want to say again that most tax dollars do not go to things that are new or shiny. For decades, the biggest parts of the federal budget have been Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, and the military. Probably since William the Conqueror, the biggest item in any city budget is the police. And at the state level, the money goes to education, healthcare, and public safety. So I know that there's this fear of the cost of shiny new programs, but most programs that we spend tax dollars on are neither shiny nor new.
We just have about a minute left for you, John, but I know we wanted to touch on the top issues when you do polling. What are people's top issues? Where do taxes rank?
Taxes have ranked pretty low, to be honest. I mean, the things that really, this is from October of last year, and the things that Oregonians really told us were important to them were public safety issues, COVID, environmental issues. That was right after the forest fires. It normally doesn't rank that high, but it's where it was. Taxes are a third tier sort of issue. People can get motivated by them, and they certainly have in the past. And we know some of that history, particularly with property taxes in the state. But right now, there are other priority issues for Oregonians. Taxes are somewhat low.
I only have about 20 seconds left for each of you. Steve, 20-second final thought?
To be a broken record, I think it's very cool that Americans are actually united on thinking that the biggest federal programs, the most expensive ones, are good programs to have. And I wish more people knew how united we are.
And Eric, 20 seconds?
Well, our state and local governments have really failed us for years, if not decades, and they were quick to blame the pandemic. But a lot of the problems were already there, and the pandemic just revealed the problems that we already had.
Well, thank you, Eric, Steve, John. We really appreciate your being here, and thank you for watching and listening. Remember, you can get Straight Talk as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Search for KGW Straight Talk. We mentioned some of the top issues for people like homelessness and housing. Next week, instead of more taxes as the answer, we look at innovative community-based solutions. That's coming up next week on Straight Talk. And if you haven't done your taxes yet, good luck. Have a great week.